All right, welcome back, everybody, for another edition of SCMP Live Chat. This week, we got our first real analyst of the sport, man, and I'm excited to pick his brain about like how he approaches fights and also the betting side of everything too, because that's something that I have no idea about. So it's good to have you on, Dan, Tom of MMA Junkie, USA Today, Live Movement, Protect Your Net Podcast, MixedMartialAnalyst.com. Man, I can't list all the names, but thank you for coming on.
Oh, way too kind of an intro, John. Always been looking forward to come on your show with you, to speak with you. I've seen you in the space. I've seen your interviews. Your presence is absolutely appreciated. So it's cool to be here to talk to you, man.
Yeah, and also you're the first fellow Asian to come on, which is always great.
Oh my man, I'm not Korean, but I appreciate my Korean brothers and sisters, the food, the culture, the martial arts. My first gateway drug into martial arts was Taekwondo, which you guys have another amazing thing Korea has brought to the table. So, yeah, man, I appreciate the Asian love, and yeah, to see more Asian faces in the media is definitely not a bad thing, man. Especially these days, it's good to see some representation out there, and especially people that represent so well, man. I mean, you seem very versed yourself. I know it's your show, but I know you have roots here in the U.S. As well as Korea, and you just seem like a really interesting cat, man. So I'm glad to see you getting after it.
Appreciate it, man. Well, respect. I think respect comes from like the grind. You know what I mean? And I think like you put in your grind and you've been doing it for years and years. It's not like you're like this new buck that just came on the scene. You've been around for a while. So, that's what I respect, that grind. I feel like if you put in the work, people are gonna respect you for what you do eventually. You know what I mean? It's not like you just like you're like trying to chase clout. Clout chasing is like a big thing right now. Don't you see it a lot, Dad, online?
Totally, man. It's really tough, man. Like it's and especially with someone like if you got the quote unquote the blue check mark, it's really easy to, abuse that or use that, or people perhaps are trying to chase your clout, and you're being way too kind. With the things you're saying about me, although I do appreciate it. Some of my numbers might say different, right? As far as size goes, but I think it's something to keep yourself humble. To both to your point, to keep grinding and not worry about the clout chasing, and as well as to remind yourself that yeah, like you're right, technically from the media side, I officially it's been 5 years from an official media side that I've been doing stuff in the public eye, right? Not including transitionary period behind the scenes or my experience like competing and whatnot. But yeah, I guess I'm getting to that point, to your point, like yeah, I guess I've been, I'm no longer a new person. I'm nowhere near a veteran, obviously, but I'm no longer a new person, so that's cool. But at the same time, I'm trying to remind myself, John, that like, dude, I'm still early in my grind in a lot of ways too, and I just got to keep my head down and keep at it.
Yeah, man. Now you're an interesting person in this space because you're an analyst. You know, what I mean, you do a lot of studying of fights and just studying of overall everything about fighters and promotions and you look at the sport in a from a unique perspective compared to me because I'm interviewing fighters, which means that I do some analyst work, but it's not like to the point what you're doing. So let's go over step by step of how you prepare to, break down a fight and do these videos and do these podcasts. Let's go into this weekend's matchup. What is it? Ferguson versus Oliveira. I'm pretty sure that is probably one of the major fights to cap off this year for the UFC. So take us through like step 1, step 2, step 3 of what you do to get ready for this.
I mean, you could say I could do more or less. You could say I do less because I'm so familiar with these guys as fans. And as far as covering, I think Oliveira Holloway is probably the first breakdown. Don't go look at it. It's terribly written. You can find it at mixedmartialanalyst.com, right? So I've been breaking down Oliveira's game for a while. Ferguson's as well. Of course, I'm one of the people in the MMA media space who really championed Tony Ferguson, especially when he was on that crazy run. So I'm very familiar with both these guys, but it's kind of like a math problem is the best analogy, especially, if we were to tie in from the betting aspect, which is also my work. And once you understand like what the numbers mean, like minus 350, to plus 250. The minus means they're favored to win. The plus means they're underdog. To be a little more specific, if they're, minus 200, it means they're 2-1 odds to win, to put it in more simpler fashion. Or if they're minus 300, they're about 3-1 odds to win. So that gives you a general arbitrary number of the chances. And I like using that, even if you're not a betting person. I stress that because even if you have no interest in betting, which is smart, it's good to use as an arbitrary kind of starting off point to answer your question of Dan, do you figure out who's going to win between fighter A and fighter B, in this case, Oliveira, Ferguson, right? So I'll look at that, and sometimes I'll look at the number, or guys like John Anik, they'll kind of do their own fun game where he'll try to figure out who the favorite is first. Then he'll go look at the betting number to see who the odds makers, so to speak, are favoring. But for my job, where it picks up from there is, do I agree with that or not? Do I agree that this guy should be favored 3-1? Maybe I think it should only be favored maybe 2-1. Maybe I don't think he should be favored at all, right? There are those occasions. So that's kind of how to tie it in from the betting perspective. But when you talk about guys like Oliveira or Ferguson, I mean, it comes down for me, to two styles, and then I will go into the tape and see who these fighters are kind of at their core. A lengthy answer, I could go even lengthier on each side, but that's kind of a general basis. You just start of it kind of as a math problem, a math equation to solve,
Yeah, that is unique, man, in many different ways because, like when I prepare for an interview, I mean, like let's say I'm going to interview Oliveira, then I got to go back and maybe watch a couple of his fights and just to see unique points in the fight that I could kind of ask about. What is your eye when you look at a fight? What are you looking for?
That's good. I used to do some interviews with MMA Junkie Radio as well, so I would kind of try to kill two birds with one stone. And even though, from an analyst perspective, a lot of people suggest to watch a fight with a commentary down, it can sway you, right? And there's a lot of truth to that. And that's no offense to the broadcasters; they do a phenomenal job. But what I found interesting, whether I'm trying to break down a fight and I'm trying to find, sometimes you don't know what the angle is till you see it and you go, oh, wow, that guy's getting hit by that shot a lot, an overhand right. And the guy he's about to face, his shot that he's most known for is an overhand right. So you kind of, again, back to the math equation, the puzzle pieces, you kind of try to put those things together. But sometimes from the commentary point of view, they'll say something that'll spark like a talking point that you totally forgot about. Right. And that can sometimes help my analysis, but more maybe even to your point, your experience, John, you tell me, but you'll be watching that fight. Maybe you'll be looking for something completely different. And the commentators, especially when they do a good job and they read the articles prior to the fight, they'll bring up these relevant like career talking points. And a lot of times that'll spark a question, like, oh yeah, that was the question about this guy. Maybe I can go ask him now, years later, citing that fight, citing his experience. What does he have to say about that now? So there are kind of common threads, I think, in what someone like yourself and someone like me can get from the same exercise.
I get a lot of messages from some handicappers, bettors, I don't know, gamblers. So I don't even know what to call it. You know what I mean? Like these guys are making tremendous amounts of money from analyzing, betting, watching interviews, all kinds of stuff. And I get messages from them. They're just like, man, I get messages before the fighter. I even interview the fighters asking me, are you going to interview this fighter? Are you going to interview this fighter? You know what I mean? Can you ask them this? Can you ask them that? And it's not just fans. These are guys that are betting on the fights. I know that they're handicappers. So, do you get messages from guys asking you about certain fighters, certain matchups?
Oh, absolutely, man. I mean, we got our staff picks that go up on Junkie today, and someone was like, hey, are you picking Ronnie? Why are you picking Ronnie Marks? What's up with that? And I was like, I'm not picking Ronnie Marks. And I went and checked, and it was a typo. So I let my editors know. But it was funny. I was like, behind the scenes, like peeling back the curtain. I'm like, I don't really care about like the staff picks or like competition wise, although it's easy to say when you're number one. But no, seriously, I was like, I honestly don't care, guys. But I'm like, could you put my right pick up there, because I have hardcore gamblers that actually follow my picks and will go and lay big money, and I don't want to mislead them. Not that Ronnie Marks can't win. He's a big boy, right? Big things happen with big boys in MMA. I'm just saying, like, I don't want that on my conscience because, you have to keep that in mind. And I totally get that. I know that even back in my day, I would be like, can you ask this fighter this or this or that? If like, my friends George and Ghost from Junkie Radio, because sometimes you just want to know those specific questions that they fall within the generic line of questions that tend to get asked anyways, but it's like its own subset when you're talking about the gamblers. Like, John, I'm sure they're asking you like, hey, make sure to ask where he's training. Who's he training with, right? That's like a real big one because the gamblers, they want to know these things. That's why I watch your interviews or, James Lynch's or all these other, phenomenal people in the space, because there's a lot of useful tidbits that you can get from it. Of course, fighters are always going to say, oh, this is the best camp of my life. Shout out to Fernando Pratis. But you know what I'm saying? They're always going to say that, of course, but there are a lot of tidbits that we pull from interviews such as the ones you do, John, that are very helpful.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot too, is that, there's certain guys that do interviews, and when you work for a major outlet, let's say for like a Aaron Bronsteter, he works for TSN, and then, you got guys like Akamoto, he's working for ESPN. Their type of interviews are completely different from the type of interviews that I'm doing, because they already have kind of this machine behind them, you know what I mean? So they could kind of delve into certain aspects that might not be interesting to the masses or even to the bettors, but they could dig into it. And I like that about their position. And I want to be in that position eventually, further on in my career, where I don't have to delve into kind of those questions about like, who are you training with? And even though I'll ask those questions, eventually, even if I continue doing this for like a massive, what is it, outlet, but there are questions that I kind of have stock to where like it's for the gamblers, you know what I mean? Because you have to kind of feed your audience, and a big part of my audience is gamblers, man. It's like it's just the reality of it, right?
It is. I mean, it's something that I've had to, accept. It was something that, from the martial arts standpoint, coming from where I come from, it was like, I don't know, man. I don't want to jinx it. I feel dirty. I don't want to play against my favorite guy. And, there's a whole lot of that. And you kind of play with, you get over, you start kind of playing for fun. But as it's kind of become part of my job and like a means to make a living, I'm like, wow, you really you're right. You do got to kind of respect that audience. And you see, even from the top down, the UFC following suit, right? At first, they were a bit, harder on it whenever John Anik would make like gambling nods, but now they are actually like encouraging him, and they're putting the odds on the broadcast that we've seen since the Fox era, right? Like it's been this slow move over, because I'm sure there's a better saying for it from actual business savvy people. Of that, I am not, but the market kind of speaks for itself, does it not? And that's oddly enough, in this pandemic era of things going on, like that's what seems to be thriving right now, is sports betting. It still seems to be booming.
Yeah, you could do it from anywhere, I mean, you could do it from a beach in Phuket to the mountains in Russia, in Siberia. So anything is possible. You could watch all the fights. There's so many promotions going on. And I feel like the popularity of MMA, it roots in two things. Number one, gambling. If the country allows you to gamble on the sport, it blows up the sport tremendously. That's why I feel like Korea, even though MMA, there's a lot of great Korean fighters, and the sport is uh is is getting bigger in the country, but because the government does not allow people to gamble on combat sports, it's not going to grow to the point where it is, let's say, in the US. I feel like in the US, gambling is so prevalent, and it's like it's just widespread to the point where like any sport will blow up basically if you can gamble on it. You can put money on it. And especially you're in Las Vegas. That's like the gambling capital of the world, which is, it's, you could go gamble on anything, right? Like, what's the weirdest thing that you saw that people can gamble on?
Oh man, the weirdest thing. Like I don't know about. I mean, I haven't participated in anything weird, but there's definitely things outside of the casino that you can gamble on. But like, I don't know, man. It's just more just the money flow. Like I used to be work security for Encore, which was a Wynn casino. It was their luxury branch, and on top of it, they have a thing called the Sky Casino, and I think the minimum buy-in was like $50,000 a hand. And they only opened it for like big, like, like whales that would come in. Like the only person of note that would play there, like that played there before, I think like Jay-Z did one time, and he like stormed off up. He lost big money. And it was just crazy. Like we always had to have like a male and a female security guard present because like the big gamblers get like, oh, you know, and a lot of it too is cultural, right? Like a lot of times they would request like a male security guard over a female. They wouldn't want to have a female. I don't know if it was luck or culture, but like, yeah, man, when people are betting big money, just things are just weird in general. I noticed.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. Now, in the other aspect of a sport growing is just the sport. You know, I mean, if it's popular, like I'm pretty sure in countries like Dagestan or Russia, it's just combat sports is ingrained into the country, so it blows up to a certain point. You know what I mean? And you got a country like the Philippines where combat sports is prevalent and gambling is prevalent, so it's
Yeah.
massive, right? That's why one championship is all up in the Philippines and trying to grow that market and getting as many fighters from that country as possible. Now, I want to go back to Ferguson and Oliveira, you know, talk about that a little bit. Like me, you know, people will come on like these chats, right? And then they'll like write these comments like I'm this like you know, like intellectual analyst about the I'm just giving you my gut feelings, right, about these matchups. It's not like I'm going back and studying these guys, you know, intricately and stuff
Right.
like that. But I'm gonna give you my gut feeling. My gut feeling is that Oliveira is going to defeat Ferguson. This is my gut feeling, you know what I mean? But there are some concerns. The first concern is, and I wanted to pick your brain about that, is Ferguson, you know, like his preparations for the fight. Like number one, you know, he's known for these unique like training methods. And then he's, you know, you heard these stories about him training for like 8 hours a day. It's overtraining something that you got to look at. And number two, he doesn't have any coaches. Like he doesn't have a head coach. He basically coaches himself and he has training partners. So, what are your thoughts on those two aspects of Tony Ferguson at this age, his age right now?
Yeah, you can't deny that whether it's the training or like his fighting style, that there's a mileage that comes along with it. And as far as overtraining goes, yeah, I mean, he's definitely, you know, put his body through the burner. And some could argue that he's burnt out. Now, I don't think he's completely burnt out, but I do think that he's further away from his prime than Charles Oliveira per se, despite Oliveira, you know, being a part of the UFC roster for over a decade, and being a part of that roster for longer than Ferguson, right? His 36-year-old counterpart. But Oliveira, despite arguably still having the same, if not more miles on paper, he doesn't show it as much as Ferguson could potentially show it. From the injuries, the noted injury history of Ferguson's knees and so on and so forth, to the nature that he does battle, which is going to kind of receive criticism in general because it's a very attritional style. He takes a lot of damage, right? As far as his camp goes, that's the funny thing, you know, breaking him down, even though he didn't win the fight against Justin Gaethje. I figured, you know, we're trying to figure out who. It's early in this whole, you know, era, right? Like who's getting the best training. And as odd as Ferguson's training is, you got to figure you got to favor guys training like that as far as like, you know, putting his own camp together, because one, it's something that they've done from boxing where like, you know, for his jiu-jitsu, you know, he'll bring in Bravo, he'll bring in Hans Molenkamp for the Muay Thai. But you're right in a sense that he is the guy operating, so it can be a little tricky, right? Sometimes you need that fatherly figure in a sport full of guys without father figures in their lives,
Mhm.
oddly enough, right? Don't know Tony's personal, not I'm just painting with a broad brush there. So it does kind of become dangerous. You get the BJ Penn thing where it's like yes man, yes man. However, I would argue a lot of people have been finding success with the smaller camps, as we're seeing, whether it's like Jackson Wink or other camps, the big camps, they're winning trends outside of maybe like the American top teams and like the Factory X's of the world. I would argue their winning percentages are going down. It's not like, you know, the mid to late aughts where everybody was just, you know, throwing their own mothers, you know, off the train tracks just to get to a super camp. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not like that anymore. Guys are okay with bringing themselves in. So you fast forward to the year of 2020, where the people that are flying to go to super camps for their camps, well, flying's a little bit tough. In fact, you weren't able to fly for parts of this year, right? Depending on where you're going. So I actually favor guys like Tony who have their own in-house camp, but the overtraining, the damage, how far he is away from his prime, John. I think that's the big question for this fight.
All right. And on Oliveira's side, you know, he's coming in on 20 days notice. And you know, Nick, could you put up that tweet from Tony Ferguson about this fight? Because I think that's something that's interesting. Is he's talking about the weight, and he said, I believe he said that if Oliveira misses weight, he's not going to take this fight. Do you believe that, Dan?
I I could believe that, but it's not I don't know. It's not that big of a deal for me because Oliveira
Mhm.
hasn't missed weight in a while, and Tony Ferguson, he's always criticized
I
fighters
gotta sign out
for
of my
weight.
personal account because Tony Ferguson's blocked me on there. So
Oh
I
no,
can get it. Yeah,
he is
I can
sensitive,
get him
man.
through
That doesn't surprise me.
the MMA. I think I
How
said
did he
something about it was the Khabib when the Khabib fight got cancelled again. I said it was cursed, and he followed me at the time. So I think he didn't like that I said that fight was cursed.
Oh man.
Oh, there's 2 points right there. He was following you, that's great, but then at the same time, he followed you to block you. So it's like, it
I know.
sucks at the end, right?
Is it on Twitter or Instagram?
I don't know, maybe it's on Instagram, I'm not for sure, but I
Instagram,
remember.
actually. I saw the
Is it
Instagram on my, I
Instagram?
think it
Okay,
was
on yeah,
Instagram.
on
Yeah.
It was
Maybe
Insta.
better
okay.
luck
All right,
there.
one second.
Yeah, so
But yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
he
go
had to
ahead.
block me there.
Oh, no worries. I was gonna say that doesn't surprise me, man, because like Tony's a guy where like you could tell him that like you could agree with him, but I agree, Tony, the sky is blue, and he's gonna disagree with you. Like
Yeah.
he is a very tough interview, man. He's not fun. I think I did like a easy like softball setup to him, like like tell us that about that triangle you just hit on Kevin Lee. He's coming off a win riding high. I don't know what he heard, but
Mhm.
he got so offended that like when he went and did Ariel's show after ours. And thankfully, I'm a nobody, so he didn't remember my name, so he couldn't put me on blast. But he was essentially like blasting the question, like he just hears what he wants to hear, and it's not the.
Yeah.
And I don't take it personally. I'm actually a Tony fan, despite it. But yeah, that's Tony.
Okay, so it says Hunger Games, Tough 13. We are no longer working with my former nutritionist perfecting athletes. At the beginning of this camp, I made a conscious decision to trust in what got me here, and the results are amazing. I have been competing in athletics for over 30 years, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here we go. Well, here's I'm counting on the Brazilian Charles Oliveira and others to come in overweight like usual. So I'm calling it now case law. But if like he's basically saying that he doesn't want to, he's not going to fight him. But at the end of the day, I kind of don't believe that, and I believe that Charles Oliveira will make weight. But let's just say he doesn't make weight, dude. It's a massive blow if Ferguson doesn't take this fight to this card, right? It's like right now this card is very top heavy with a flyweight title, and then with Ferguson Oliveira. I'm pretty sure most people are hyped for Ferguson Oliveira more than anything, right?
Yeah, I think so too. And obviously, it would be a huge blow. It wouldn't make him very many fans. And to be honest, it feels like the post alone is making him lose fans, which I actually would argue is unfair. I mean, first of all, one thing I didn't pick up was that the initial post is him leaving perfecting athletes. That's something very interesting that I'll get back to here in a second. Second of all, he says uh, Charles Oliveira and others. And I keep hearing this and seeing it posted, yet I haven't heard one person mention the others part, much less the other part that I have. Thank you guys for pulling it up here. Look at this intricate setup you guys are doing. Beautiful. And now I actually get to see it. But it's like, I feel like it's a bit unfair narrative. I mean, do we forget about the tiramisu and how he tormented Khabib? Like,
Mhm.
for any fighter, much less Tony Ferguson, to play mind games with a fighter, like, should we really be surprised? No. Should we be surprised that Tony Ferguson of all fighters is doing it? No. Tony Ferguson, who's always had trouble or who's always been outspoken about fighters missing weight, he's very proud of his wrestling background. He's got the USA wrestling tattoo. Doesn't surprise me there. That checkbox is checked. Multiple rounds of making fun of Khabib for missed weight and other fighters who miss weight. That checkbox is checked. So, like, I don't know why everybody's getting up in arms of this. This seems like par for the course, the course for Tony Ferguson. And I don't bring this up to slight. If anybody's sensitive toward mental health, it is me. But I mean, this is the guy, that has done battle in his house with invisible characters. I mean, to make a post about a fighter not missing weight, I mean, that seems par for the course for any fighter, much less a Tony Ferguson. So I wouldn't worry about it because Charles Oliveira has not missed weight at a 155 ever. He's not missed weight in his last 7 fights. I just think Tony was just saying that as an in general, going out there for others. I think the bigger story here is him splitting ways with perfecting athletes. The people there seem very nice. They seem to be very well connected with fighters in the media space. I have no experience with them. So with all those factors, of course, I'm not going to say any slander, nor do I have anything slanderous to say. However, high level, he wouldn't be the first high level champion, cough, cough, Ioana Jędrzejczyk, to complain about kind of their methods. And I'm somebody who does follow the nutritious, the weight cut side. I kind of pride myself, John, on being able to tell if a fighter is going to miss weight or not. And to whatever, not trying to slander or anything, but just going off of facts and basing it off of criticisms that were made by other fighters publicly, like Joanna and Jacek or other fighters of the world. Yeah, I mean, we have seen weight misses. We have seen fighters, whether they complain about them or not, like Alex Perez in his recent bid for a title, use perfecting athletes before. Again, I'm not trying to put a live or die on someone's weight cut or slander a company, but this is again another fighter going at this company. Again, no one's talking about these angles, John. So I feel like it's my duty to bring them up.
Definitely. You said that you pride yourself in like kind of predicting if a fighter will miss weight. What are you looking for? What do you see? I'm very curious.
I don't know. Part of me thinks it's a weird sense because, like, shout out to my man Aaron Bronsteter up at TSN Canada. He used to, one of his previous jobs was a guess that weight guy at a carny when he was in his younger days, of course. And I feel like I could have had that job too because I think as men we naturally size people up, but again, never done it at a meaningful level. Never meant to or have any illusions about my skill levels, folks. But yes, even though it doesn't look like it, I have competed. Cutted weight in multiple martial arts and multiple combat sports throughout my entire life. So that I've traveled across the globe from China to New York City to Las Vegas, different types of people. And you just tend to kind of get a certain feel for how much people weigh. Me being a heavy bone Hawaiian was always upset with this because I would make it a point. I'd find some like really like guy way buffer than me, wider chested, taller, all that stuff. And he was, then I'd be like, how much do you weigh, man? And he'd be like, 176. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what do you eat? Cheeseburgers, fries, what a grilled cheese, whatever American diet. I'm like, are you kidding me? I have to diet and my, my Hawaiians at my part Hawaiian Samoan, but like at my best, like I have to kill myself just to make this weight. And I don't look like it. You know what I'm saying? So it always would drive me crazy. Now you fast forward to my job and whatnot. I take all those prior reserves and knowledge. And I think it just kind of gives me a database to where I go back and do these homework. And sometimes it doesn't have to be good homework. It could just be going to Mike Perry's Instagram and seeing him shoveling a bunch of cheeseburgers in his face. And you're like, wow, this guy's probably not going to make weight, but you can, do the old eye test. You can compare prior weigh-in photos. You can go to their social media, even scroll before they weighed in when you knew they looked good, when you knew they made weight to prior fights, compare those images. And you kind of get a basic, you can get a basic feel for how someone's going into the fight if there's any flags or not.
All right. Now with like the UFC and the current climate, right? And we're gonna get to some of the questions right now. So before we go to the next topic I have lined up, let's get to some of the questions. Nick, what do we got here?
Let's have a look. I think Tristan is asking, do you all think Vettori could out-wrestle Adesanya and hold him down in a rematch and get the W? I imagine it's because Adesanya has been posting videos about getting his purple belt finally.
Dan, I'll let you, you're the guest. I'll let you delve into this one.
Yeah, man, that's real interesting. I think he's, got a shot to do that. We saw him go to it late. We didn't see him attempt it in the first fight. However, I feel like we've seen more improvements in the grappling department, albeit defensively, right? In Adesanya's case than we've seen Vettori. Vettori, he hasn't improved as much or has gone to his grappling as much offensively. I should say any more than he already has. In fact, Vettori too himself seems to most likely prefer to use it defensively. Obviously, probably would want to do it differently in a rematch. So I think it'd be super interesting. I think it's more the gas tank and the pace. Whether or not he gets the takedown is going to be the big determining factor for his success against Adesanya.
Man, Vettori, his performance against Hermanson was absolutely incredible. He put a lot of pressure on himself. He talked the talk and he went in there and walked the walk. That's the sport right there. That's what I love about the sport is guys that are confident, that are that say what they're gonna do, and they go out there and perform and in front of the big lights, man. And Vettori did, man. And Vittori's been talking for a long time. He's been confident for a long time. He ever since he lost that fight to Adesanya. But yeah, like one thing that's in this fight against Hermanson, and Hermanson is a great fighter, man. He was ranked number 4, and now Vettori's ranked number 5, which is like the biggest jump we've ever seen. You know, one of the biggest jumps we've ever seen in the rankings, right? Ever. Do you remember anybody jumping so far ahead? Oh, Cynthia Calvillo, probably, because she wasn't even ranked.
Or maybe Chimaev, he would have kept this fight next week, right?
Yeah, he could have been number 1, you know, if he won that fight, right?
Yep.
So
yeah,
we could see some crazy jumps, but you know, like rankings are rankings and everything, and I feel like Vettori, with that win, he does deserve to be up there. I don't know if he's number 5, but you know, he deserves to be up there in that top echelons of the middleweight division. And man, his chin, like, he got hit, you know, and every time he got hit, he just ate it. And Hermanson, he could crack. And man, he just ate it and marched forward and was just cracking Hermanson. It just seemed like whenever Vettori would land, his strikes were straight down the pipe and very accurate. And his striking just looks way crisper than it has ever. And I feel like this rematch with Adesanya that he really wants, I feel like it's gonna happen someday, man. I feel like his first fight was very close, and you see Vettori, he's getting better and better and better. But who do you see him fighting next, though, Dan? Like, who do you see as the best matchup? You see the question coming up.
Steven, question, yeah, perfect timing.
Till Costa, what do you got?
I like all those suggestions. The Costa one's kind of hard not to get sold on, especially since he was calling for it himself. Vettori was, and again, you know, especially if like it's a Costa that can keep that pace. That's going to be interesting, you know, because Vettori, again, the most impressive thing to me is that pace and pressure. He can take these shots, to your point, with that chin, and he's got that pace and pressure, man. The striking is interesting because he's got the same reach as Conor McGregor, which isn't actually that long for middleweight standards, but he is making like improvements in his boxing there as well. So I feel like that would be just too fun of a match. Whereas I love Darren Till, but Darren Till would be have a better chance, which is good for him, of slowing Vettori and the fight down. Till has a tendency to do that, which I like, but it doesn't make for as fun of a fight.
Man, I would like to see either one of those, especially Till, because they're both southpaws, and you know, I love to see a southpaw versus southpaw. And Hermanson was getting ready for Till, who was a southpaw. When I interviewed Hermanson, I asked him about that. You know, when they switched from Till to Holland, I said, hey, you know, all that preparation for a southpaw, and now you got to fight an orthodox fighter. You know what is it gonna do? He's like, oh, it's all good, don't worry about it. And then it gets switched again back to a southpaw, and it just seemed like, you know, he just couldn't find his range, and Vettori's range was just perfect. And another thing was weird is I think Hermanson was trying to slap Vettori all the time, and that's why all those scratches on his face. That was like the craziest thing. He did look like Chucky, right?
Yeah, that was weird, man. Like, I feel like, I think it was like BJ Penn, Diego Sanchez at UFC 107. Like, BJ had like a bunch of scratches too, and I'm like, what the heck is that? Was he like a Meg from Family Guy, where he has the superpower where Jack Hermanson grows the nails and he's like, Sah! Like, I don't know. That was some crafty tactics there, some vet stuff.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, man, it just, where does Hermanson go, do you think? You know what I mean? Like, Hermanson did have a lot of momentum, and he was talking about, like, this is why he's taking these, that's why he took the Vettori fight, because he wanted to keep active, because he didn't want to sit around for too long. But now, you know, with the loss, and then I think he fractured his orbital, and he broke his toe, so he probably will be out for a little while. What do you see for him next year?
I hope he gets the rest that he needs. I was really impressed, just the will that he showed. You know, you want to talk about guys fighting kind of against type, like Jack Hermanson in a certain way. It kind of remind me of Charles Oliveira, who I'm sure we'll round about and talk that matchup. You know, or I saw a question on that matchup as well. But I compare them because people accuse Oliveira of you know, kind of crumbling when the pressure gets high, and to see that levied upon Hermanson, but for him to just, even in a losing victory, like, still come forward. It wins points with me. Hopefully it won points with the UFC brass. I hope he gets a favorable matchup next, but I think it's going to be one of those matchups that they're going to pair him with probably some up and comer, like you know, like a Dawkins type guy, you know, like a Contender Series type middleweight who has already had a fight or two. And they're either going to set up Jack to push that guy over, or it's going to look like a hindsight matchup where, it's the vet lesson, wait your turn, and hopefully Jack gets his confidence back up, which is what I'm hoping for.
Nick, can we get the rankings up? Because I think that becomes prevalent. Because I don't even know where Jack Hermanson sits right now. I just know that Vettori got bumped up to number 5. But yeah, like Hermanson, he'll probably come back in the middle of next year sometime, let it heal, reset. And he's a guy that comes back improved after losses. So I feel like he's gonna come back and face whoever he faces. They're in big trouble because Hermanson, when he comes off a loss, he is a much improved fighter, and he seems like he has this edge about him when he's coming off a loss. So I don't know who he should face next, because I'll say like Jacare, but he already beat a lot of the guys coming up, so it's hard to say. Let's see what we got here. So Hermanson just drops to number 6. You got Brunson, Gastelum. He beat Gastelum. You got Uriah Hall, and I think Uriah Hall is set to face Chris Weidman next, right? I feel like Hermanson could face the winner of that fight, right? Hall versus Weidman, because he was scheduled to face Weidman earlier this year. So why not? Whoever wins that fight, since Jack is number 6, let him face the winner.
I actually like that a lot. Yeah, that's more deserving of where his rankings are and whatnot. It's so hard to tell. It feels like it's like just who's available right now as far as like, matchups go. But yeah, if he's coming back in the middle of next year, then that actually probably may line up just right.
And I like the resurgence of Uriah Hall too. I like watching that. You know what I mean? Because when he came in with the Ultimate Fighter, everybody's like, "Oh, he's the next Anderson Silva," and there's so much hype. And then he got a couple losses, and everybody jumped off the bandwagon. He goes to Fortis MMA, hooks up with Safe. Shout out to Safe, man. Incredible coach, incredible team out there. So many killers, and he just reborn, making the second run. And I understand why Uriah Hall is so pissed off at the media and everybody, right? I understand it, because everybody jumped off the bandwagon and was talking trash about him all day, every day. And now he's slowly creeping up. And I feel like he's a major favorite in that fight against Weidman. Do you see him as a major favorite?
I do. Yeah, I think he can get it back on him. It's mainly because, again, like, mimicking the boxing success. Uriah Faber is one of those stories. The story for me, wasn't so much, unfortunately it became, Dana White's reaction to the fight, right, between Silva and Hall. But for me, the story was Hall's not just renaissance, if you will, but the renaissance in house as a tie-in with Fortis MMA and Safe Saeed. Him and Safe Saeed have a tight connection. Hall's not an easy guy to get along with, not just from the media in general. Like, I get it. I get the chip on his shoulder. The bullying, all these things, the martial art mentality. Like, I've got little bits of that in me, I guess. So I give him a pass, even if he's not the best interview to myself or others, right? Like, I get it. So for someone like to connect with them on that kind of, again, that father-son level, that coach level that we see the story in boxing so much, we still don't see it a lot in MMA in its short history. And I think Hall and Saeed is going to be one of those cases. So that's what I want to watch.
Yeah, I'm glued to the tube for that, man. I'm glued to the tube for Hall, his resurgence. And even though I've never interviewed him and even, ever got into contact with him, but man, I love the story. I love the chip on the shoulder. I love that he calls out his interview ahead of the Anderson Silva fight, his media day, like that, that what is it, press? I don't even know what you call it, media day, right? That was one of the best media days ever, man, because he would just question the questions, like, what is this? Like, it made me laugh a lot.
Dude, I feel like I actually had some of those moments today, just talking with just people and voice services and command prompts as of the day and age that we're in, right? So I feel like we've all been there once or twice this year. So yeah, you got to cut them some slack for that for sure and enjoy it. I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, you gotta, man. You gotta, you cannot, like me, as someone that interviews fighters and coaches and whatnot. Sometimes you do have questions that seem kind of, weird. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem normal. You know what I mean? Sometimes it seems like a layup question to you, but really to the person that's listening on the other end, it's not a layup question. It's kind of like an obvious question where it's, with obvious answers. And I like fighters to respond that way, because it challenges me to kind of come back with something else, you know what I mean, and respond to it, and it puts you on the spot. Not every interview is going to be easy. So you know, I've had some rough ones in the past, and I'm pretty sure I've interviewed fighters and then they don't want to interview with me again because I left a bad taste in their mouth, you know what I mean? So I understand that, you know, I can't get hurt by that. It's I'm fortunate enough to have fighters come, take their time, and get, you know, give me their time and allow me to, you know, question them. And it's not like they're prepared with questions. They're just coming on. It's like just go time, and then they have to respond to whatever I have for them. So I'm always fortunate, man. I'm always grateful for these guys to come on and you know, do the interviews. But yeah, Uriah Hall, I'm looking forward to that. This middleweight division, it's in it's I don't know, man. I don't, you know, like with Adesanya going up to 205, I don't think that that's the right move, because I feel like there's so many contenders coming up in the middleweight division to where he could fight a lot of these guys. But you know, this is a business, and when you have a business, you need to make money, and I feel like they're just trying to make more money, the most money possible right now, especially with the star power of Adesanya. And it kind of works out, to be honest with you, more for Jan Blachowicz, because he's not as popular as, you know, some may want to think. And if he does fight Adesanya, his popularity grows tremendously. And if he does go out there and smashes Adesanya, I think like you got another major European star on your hands.
Yeah, I feel like we've lost a lot of that context of the UFC's marketing strategy to our genuine interest as far as fighters from certain parts of the world who representing certain markets, because all the fights and now are being, you know, sent to Abu Dhabi or in my backyard here in the Las Vegas desert, right? So it kind of takes that whole, you know, these really like built out of nowhere, literally built into deserts, man-made places with not tons of historical or cultural ties to it, right? Kind of housing all these fights. We forget about that aspect. And I thought about it because you bring up Jan Blachowicz, and I feel like if Blachowicz can hang on to his belt until we start, you know, returning to normal, and as I use air quotes here, that could be a great key back into, you know, back into Poland. As far as, you know, KSW having their stronghold there, but UFC's done shows there before while KSW existed. And Blachowicz, man, he's a real player for the European scene once we get back to those days.
There's so many players in the European scene right now. You know, you got Yuri Prochaska, you got Rakic, you got Joanna Jędrzejczyk, of course, you know, former champ. You know, you got a bunch of guys in the UK. You got Leon Edwards, you got Darren Till. The European market is thriving, man. Even in Russia, you know, you got Peter Yan, you know, what is it? Zabit. You know, I mean, there's so many locations you can go and have these fighters headline. And it sucks for the UFC, right? This pandemic, because they're at a perfect point right now to where they could have been at 60 different countries, man, probably in one calendar year, but they can't. They're just stuck at two spots. But man, it doesn't matter. The UFC is thriving no matter what, right? It's just this machine that they have, and that leads me to the next topic, which is the UFC chopping block, right? Like Dana White comes out and says that, you know, after they released Yoel Romero, and before that they released Anderson Silva, and then now he says that there's gonna be 60 more fighters that they're possibly releasing, and some surprising names, and I feel like this is something that is just a business move, man. That's what it is. At the end of the day, it's not about relationships. It's about, what have you done for me lately? How old are you? What promise do you have? What kind of matchups can we put you in? Are you going to be lucrative for the company? And if you're not, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to, you know, let you walk. You know, Danton, what do you think's behind this whole release of fighters 60? I'm pretty sure it's going to be probably like 100. They're just lowballing us.
Yeah, there's two schools of thought. Like, I don't agree with the whole, you know, for as much as Dana White wants to, you know, demonize the media and feel like he's been going to war with the media since this whole stuff started this year, right? It's a very divisive time in general, and the media certainly isn't on Santa's good list, whether it's Dana White or many others. So I get it, but I'm just saying for what it is. He's been pretty contentious, and sure, the media is already running around, and we're going, oh, you know, we're asking fighters, do you think you're going to be cut? And these fighters are like, why are you asking me this? This is a stressful job enough. I have to fight in front of a cage. Please don't ask me these questions. You know, so it's like, it's this like super tension that like, you know, I get the criticism. Like, I really wish kind of Dana didn't put that out there. But then there's the other school of thought where we kind of maybe should have seen this coming. I know my colleague John Morgan put out an article with probably the closest thing as far as like roster figures that you know, as far as from an official number, the UFC's released in a minute, I believe. And like, you kind of get an idea for it. And with the Contender Series, especially those of us who've had our eyes on it, we kind of smelt this coming too, because you're like, okay, there is no biological free lunch in life, much less MMA. So if we're signing on this talent, this sucks because we're going to be cutting this talent. So a lot of this was coming. Does it make it any easier to deal with? No. But I do believe, John, that I think the doom and gloom portion of all these narratives that even depress me, admittedly so at times, I believe there is a silver lining spin to it. One, which probably a lot less realistic, but a guy can dream, is that, yeah, I think they're going to cut maybe closer to 100 than it is 60. And, you know, I believe, you know, my man James Lynch on Octagon Outlook pitched a fantastic idea of the UFC maybe taking a little bit of a break to recoup, maybe making some kind of even just for an amendment for this year and the next until we recover from this whole ordeal of 2020, right? To kind of give some breathing room, because the cards are barely staying afloat from a business model. Yeah, it's all about crossing the finish line, but they're barely even doing that. Forget about judging the standard, which is clearly at a subset for par, right? It's lower. But they're barely even getting across the finish line despite that. So perhaps there could be some good news. Maybe they will learn some lessons. However, I think the silver lining is we already saw it announced today, Rumble Johnson. Regardless if you're excited about that or not, I'm not telling you how to feel, but the point is we're seeing the talent go to other places. We're seeing other places spend money for that talent. We're seeing other promotions, even the makeshift ones, put together cards that are like selling well, regardless of what you think of them, right? So I like competition. I think competition's healthy, and I think this cuts and this filtration system, I think it's going to allow for some more healthy competition, man. Maybe like back in the Strike Force days, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, before we get into the free agency, you know, I wanted to, you know, talk more about the cuts, because I feel like the UFC, since they're putting on so many cards, they could have at least, you know, looked at some of the fighters before they cut them, especially if they're coming off a win, to kind of match him up with one of the, you know, another veteran. They feel like, okay, you know, we're maybe on the verge of getting rid of this guy, and let them fight it out. You know what I mean? Let the guys fight for the contracts, and kind of put it out there like these guys are fighting for their contracts. Let's put some mustard on it, or just put them against the Contender Series, some of the prospects coming out of that show, and let them prove themselves in, you know, in the octagon. I don't know, man. It kind of sucks that, you know, like when you see like Anderson Silva and Yoel Romero and Rumble Johnson and Fabricio Verdum, those guys going out there, of course they're gonna be a hot commodity in this free agent world. But when you look at the guys at the lower tier, you got to give them a second chance, man. Like that's how I look at it. It's like you got to give them a second chance, let them prove themselves, give them one more fight, even if you're thinking about cutting them, because really at the end of the day, you're not paying them that much compared to what you're paying Anderson Silva or a Rumble Johnson or a Verdum or Romero, right? So, you know, that's kind of like the way that I look at it, is like, give these guys a shot. Because, you know, at the beginning of the year, Dana White said, you know, we're going to keep all our employees, but really the fighters are not as employees, I guess. Right, Dan?
Yeah, man. It's like the independent contractor stuff. It's to their convenience. And that's kind of the sad part about it. And I don't even know, you know, if that employee thing is going to hold true, right? I mean, we've seen them cut people right before the holidays before. This wouldn't be the first time. So it's just a bummer. I agree with you on the second chance. I'm still a bit reserved on any type of advertising, whether it's like the type that Dana White did, kind of just avant-garde, just kind of let it out of his mouth, like, oh yeah, we're gonna have cuts, or, you know, putting mustard on it, so to speak, because it's like, man, there's enough pressure on these guys. Like, you know, it's already unfair enough for them to fight for the contract. And like, if you look at who's getting the contract and who's not, in a lot of these cases from the Contender Series, like, I don't know, I feel like it's going to be UFC Hunger Games at a certain point if we go a little too far down that road. So, I'm all for the second chances though, especially for the low salary guys. It actually makes a lot of sense, especially with the way their shows have been running.
Another idea that I just thought of right now is that you take the guys that are the veterans and you put them on the Contender Series against the prospects. What, would that be okay? Do you think that that would be a possible solution to kind of let these guys possibly, keep their jobs with the UFC? I feel like if you're, you do it, you see it in other sports, right? You see guys that are like in Major League Baseball, a guy that's not doing so well on the big team, let's say the New York Yankees, they send them down to the farm league, right? And let them prove themselves again. And that's what I look at the Contender Series as. It's like the farm league. It's like the NFL Combine, So do you think that would be a good idea? Do you think the UFC would be favorable for that? Do you think that would work out?
It does in theory, but MMA is so much more of a volatile sport. It's hard to put these models. I like that Christopher Edwards Bailey with using these bigger names that they couldn't make use to them. It kind of fits your previous points on certain angles as well, John. But it's weird because if we're continuing with other sports analogies, right? Like we're not seeing that crossover. I agree, whether they're going against each other to build profile or even on the same team. Like my favorite, the legendary Chicago Bulls team with Michael Jordan, right? They didn't really have much notable big men. But what they did have for part of their run was a guy finishing out his contract from another generation named Robert Parrish, who actually made his name as a Boston Celtic, right? And Robert Parrish, big guy, walked with it was just not a guy you wanted to mess with, but he brought kind of a respect, right? Whether it was to keep guys in line on the team, and you don't have that dynamic in MMA, so that doesn't apply here, right? But when you do have the bigger names like the Verdums or the Silvas, it helps keep that UFC aura alive of why it's number one in pretty much all of our eyes, right? As for ranking organizations, like, oh, this guy's here, this guy's there. Okay, well, I'll stay on the team. This guy's on the team too. Look, he's still here, and look how old he is, and they're still giving him spot. I got something to work for, right? But not only when you cut these guys, you have less to entice, or as Christopher Edwards Bailey put, less kind of iron sharpens iron to match him up and build him up with, and you're also giving those tools to your competitors, mind you. But then there's also that other level of like, you look at their seats at the table, union, wait, we're an employee here, but we're not here. It's very convenient how this works out. And then you're seeing like the older guys kind of cut loose, former champions, even guys, who paid their dues. And yes, obviously contracts are up, and a lot of the times it could be a mutual thing, right? I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying, UFC controls everything and they're all evil 100%, but it's like one of those things where when you do see them kind of discarding the older school, you start to wonder, hey man, what am I fighting for here?
Mhm.
And if you're the UFC, you want to maintain that number one. You want to maintain it with the quality, with the level. You want to be able to keep your guys, even if you're not able to put on the quality fights. So that part of it, yes, I agree. I'm winded there, long-winded, but I agree. It is puzzling from a business side of those cuts in that perspective.
But I want to spin this into a positive for the fighters that are getting released and getting cut by the UFC, is that the free agent market is bigger than ever. You got Bellator, you got PFL, you got One Championship, you got Rizin, KSW, ACA, Combates. You even got XFC coming into the mix, with their TV deal. And they're, it seems like they're trying to sign, big names, or at least, veterans of the sport, and giving them decent purses, right? So what do you think about the free agency? Is it better than ever? Do you feel like the competition is working out for a lot of these fighters, especially like Verdum and Rumble Johnson as of late? Not so much for Anderson Silva.
I can't speak for these case by case scenario because my insight obviously is I'm not in their camps, nor is it my beat. But what I can say is I agree with your silver lining there, John. And I can see it not just from the outside looking in, but just even the few sports I've covered or the few promotions I've covered in person. I've actually covered not as much UFC. It's my main coverage, obviously, for analysis and beat. But I'm talking about in person, going to the shows.
Mhm.
Mainly, it's been Dana White Contender Series and Bellator. And I feel like that's an interesting subsect because the one thing I notice is that whenever you're getting, whether it's Liz Carmouche or Lyoto Machida, or a lot of these champions, title challengers, people who are Strikeforce vets, Pride, made their name in the UFC, right? A lot of the times it's burnout, been there, done that, and it almost becomes depressing. It's like a Darren Aronofsky movie, like The Wrestler. You see him, the venues get crappier and crappier, even though you should be getting respect with your old age. It doesn't always work like that in the worlds that we follow, right? But at Bellator, I didn't get that vibe. Like, I genuinely got a similar sense of rejuvenation from these vets who have seen it all that was actually akin to the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series. They're not getting the best, you poke holes in that whole process, right? They're not getting the best beats, the best contracts, etc. But they're happy as crap because they're young. They're too young to know any better. And it's the UFC, baby. You just made your big shot, right? And I think it's kind of cool that I get some of that same vibe from like longtime vets. Again, fighters can say anything in interviews. You know this, John. You have to read between the lines sometimes to their emotion. And I think that is a silver lining. I know I just kind of gave a pump to Bellator there, but in general, you see that there is life after the UFC, that even though UFC does earn its number one ranking, so to speak, for a good reason, it's not the end all be all either. There are plenty of markets to make your living in out there.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, like there is plenty of markets. There's worldwide, there's promotions that can throw you some cash. Like if you're of Latin descent, Combates. I just saw that Combates is interested in signing Yoel Romero. Think of that. Think of Yoel Romero versus Tito Ortiz. They could that's a big fight. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people don't really want to see Tito Ortiz fight anymore, but hey, it's a big fight. He's a name, and Yoel is still a monster. You know what I mean? He's still a top 5 middleweight in the world, and maybe he's a top 5, top 10 light heavyweight. It all depends on where he wants to fight. But yeah, and Bellator, they're doing a great job. I love Scott Coker. Also, he's half Korean, so all love to him. And Bellator has a lot of Asians working in that. Have you noticed that, Dan?
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. It felt like it was Bellator Hawaii, even when it's not Bellator Hawaii. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Shout out to Rich too. Rich, right? Rich, yeah. Shout out to Rich.
Yep, it's true. Yep.
Yeah, and what is it? Yeah, you got like PFL, you know what I mean? Verdum, I interviewed him not too long ago. He seems like he's super happy to be able to end his career. He says he got 3 years left fighting in PFL. He's gonna get a bunch of fights and possibly win $1 million. It all depends on what the fighter wants out of their career. You know what I mean? Nowadays, it's not just about the UFC. It's not just about the championship belt. Sometimes you got to step back and say, okay, am I good enough? Right? Sometimes some fighters are realistic about it. Am I good enough to be a UFC champion? And if you believe so, then go after that goal, that dream of being the UFC champion. And money is not the most important factor for you. But if money is an important factor for you and you are very well skilled and you could beat a lot of the top guys, but the belt is not as important, I'd say go to a Bellator, because I feel like the Bellator belt is just, it's not as, I guess there's tiers to belt levels, right? But Bellator is a high level belt, man. That is an important belt. You're going to face some of the top guys in the world to get up to that level and win that championship. PFL, one championship, some of those weight classes are incredible. If you win a title there, it is, Demetrius Johnson's over there. Eddie Alvarez is over there. Martin Nguyen, Ong La, Tan Lee just won the championship belt. He's incredible, man. I think he's like 4-0 with the promotion with all knockouts. It's, he's going through there and kind of like, I don't know if he's finding his second win, but man, he's been incredible his last couple years with that promotion. Also, you got KSW. They're incredible. They're paying their fighters a lot. Rizin, look at Rizin, man. Rizin has put on incredible shows, and they've had Floyd Mayweather. You got Tension. You got Kaya Sakura. Man, there's just so much out there. It all just depends. Everybody's all like, what if Kaya Sakura went to the UFC? I don't even think he needs to go to the UFC. Like, what's the point, man? If he's satisfied being the Rizin champion, if he's getting paid what he needs to get paid or what you think he deserves to get paid, why would you go to the UFC to get lowballed and fight, guys that I don't know, could probably possibly beat you. I don't know. It's like it all depends on what the fighter's goals are, right? And you probably run into this a lot. You're around a lot of fighters in Las Vegas. You train, so you know, like every fighter has a different goal, right?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely spot on from there. And it's funny, like not even, I saw some comments, it's about the money, and I know a lot of those were more about like UFC and whatnot. And I don't disagree with that. There was some interesting I think Tan Win had a real interesting, really nice, like well put saying there in your chat. So I don't disagree with that aspect. However, I would also just argue that it even fits the model of what I would want for a successful fighter. Like I'm not a manager, I'm not business savvy enough to be one. But let's just say I was a manager and we forget about the business stuff. And like, I just wanted my fighter to be successful, just hypothetically, just for a second. Obviously you need the business and the money part. But I would argue these days, even if the UFC is the end goal, I would argue it's almost safer to put it down the road, because once you're in the UFC, you're in that machine, and not even just talking about the money, the matchmaking. We've seen it, whether you're a nobody or whether you're a somebody, even in the UFC's eyes, the matchmaking isn't favorable. You're either getting buried for nobody to see you for when you do good or don't do good. Or even if you're a guy they like and they want to push, they almost push you too hard and too fast. And then you're in your debut, and almost the worst thing you could do is like the Alex Hernandez situation where you knock out a Beneil Dariush, because now you're getting fed to the wolves. You're already on the top level of the world, and now you're really getting fed to the wolves. So I would argue getting to the UFC fast and having an impressive debut performance is amongst the worst things you could do for your career these days, in a really weird way.
Yeah, I agree. And there's guys that are on the opposite of the spectrum, such as like a Yuri Prohaska, who has like 20 something fights, been
Yes.
tested against some of the best in the world. So when you do get into the UFC, they could put you against a Vulcan Ozdemir, and then you could go out there and perform very well, and it catapults you because you're ready for that. You've been fighting in front of crowds of 20,000, 30,000, and against the top fighters of the world. So you're ready. Like even for like a Manel Cape, both I'm talking about Rizin fighters, but I believe like if you build yourself up in a promotion like a Rizin, and your goal, your end goal, like you said, is the UFC, you have to kind of spend some time there and fight against some of the best, and capture a title in those promotions and move on. But if your end goal is not the UFC, and you're comfortable fighting for one championship and being a champion for them, and it's very lucrative for you, you might as well stay there, man. And some of these promotions, they treat these fighters really well, and if they go to the UFC, they won't be treated well. They'll just be treated like a cog in a machine, you know what I mean? And that's what the UFC is.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's really tough to get that attention, especially even like from certain markets, because they can't even really push that right now, where it's like if you're lucky, you'll get like kind of, maybe that promo package when you make it to the top of the card. But I don't know, man. It's so few and far between. And yeah, I do like what other organizations do, that kind of personal touch, that personal feel. It's a good way to get experience, to get paid. And like you said, if you want to just continue on there, then a lot of times there's no reason to, especially like, like culturally, a lot of these guys, like, they're not chasing the same things. Like you said, fighters have different goals. It's different whether it's religious or cultural, like they're not chasing, the Hollywood signs necessarily. Like they could be okay fighting, close to home, in an organization that treats them well, they like, and they could sleep just fine at night with a decent bank account.
Yeah, and I feel like around the fighter, right, their circle of friends and I guess coaches and management, and also the fans too, social media plays a big factor. They kind of could get bullied into pushing them into the UFC. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I want to see this guy fight this guy in the UFC. What can this guy do against this guy in the UFC? You know what I mean? He's the champion over here. So, how would he stack against these guys in the UFC? It's like almost if the fighter doesn't want to go to the UFC and they're doing really well on their own, and with the promotion that they're at, they kind of get bullied into this. And terrible management could be a factor too, right? The manager's like looking at the dollar signs, and you know how it is, man. This business has some, like, a lot of dirty aspects to it, and a fighter can fall into these holes, man. And I interview fighters, and I hear about fighters signing with certain management companies or certain managers, and they get screwed, man, like terribly screwed, financially and just in decision making and matchmaking and kind of like the guidance of their career. So yeah, going back to free agency, man, it's I think it's great. I think like Yoel Romero, people are saying like these companies are not interested in Yoel Romero. I think that's crazy to me. Like, why would you not be interested in Yoel Romero? That dude's the top 5 middleweight of the world. Like Anderson Silva. Why would you not be interested in it? He still wants to fight, and I feel like you could have him headline a bunch of cards if you're any promotion, and why wouldn't I guess the price tag has to do with some of it, I guess. I don't know for sure because I'm not in the negotiating room, but imagine Anderson Silva in the PFL $1 million tournament, man. It allows him to fight as many times, up to like 5 or 6 times in 1 year, and he gets to do what he loves. And I think that's at the end of the day, that's Anderson Silva. I mean, I feel like he's already rich, and of course he wants to get paid decent, but he wants to just fight. And I feel like PFL would be great for both of them, for Anderson and for PFL, because it's Anderson Silva, for Christ's sake. Right?
Yeah, man. PFL's been getting them contracts, so I want to see them just get going. Anderson, I'm there's the one guy that I am getting roped into with this whole boxing talk. I could probably see that a little more, but yeah, I would love to see these organizations. I feel like a lot of them have been developing their rosters quietly during this 2020 era when all this craziness has been going on. So I'm really excited to see everybody to get back up to speed. And maybe we start getting back into those, days where we got the IFL doing their thing over here. We got, Strikeforce still on the regional scene over there. We got, all the Asian promotions across the way. Like now we got Mexico going. Like, so I don't know, man. I'm just excited to get some healthy competition injected.
Yeah, I want it. I want the competition, and it's good for us, us, people in the media, because we get to, know about more fighters around the world, and also it gives us more content. That's what's important, right? The content. And for us, it's important, I mean? Like it allows us to, do more and get our face out there and grow, as a member of the media, and it's good, man.
Yes.
And I love the fighters, and I'll support the fighters. I support the fighters are number one. Number two is the organizations, right?
Yeah.
Like you gotta support, because without the fighters, there is no organization, there is no media, none. That it doesn't exist, right? So you gotta support the fighters as much as you can. And the one thing I wanted to get into also from the media side is for you, Dan, is like when you break down fights, like you have to say certain things about fighters that they don't want to hear, right? For me, I don't do that because I actually interview the fighters, so I kind of limit my criticism on certain fighters, but I'll say what I see, you know what I mean? But I won't dig into the fighters that like some other people do. Some other, talking heads or analysts or whatever, they dig into the fighters almost too much, right? But for you, how do fighters react? I'm pretty sure you run into fighters all the time.
Yeah, it's a tough balance because like it's not in my nature to joke inappropriately so, but also it's not in my nature to be disrespectful. So you're always trying to walk that line, right? And then two, I come from the martial arts side. So even though it's a little different, I'm seeing more media people now, which is refreshing. But especially the reason why I got into it, because there's very little media who came from the fighting side, or much less the competition or martial arts side of things. And I felt that was needed. That's why I got into the space. That being said, do I feel like it gives me a license to speak and criticize, even when you could argue I do have that license? No, I don't. I don't rest on that one bit. And I always worry about this. In fact, maybe a little too much. I almost wish I could let it fly, because it seems a lot more fun. That's for sure. But yeah, I again, I'm not perfect, and I try to walk that line myself. As far as trying to keep it respectful, and that's another thing too. It's like I get it. I'm glad you feel that way because you have to interview those fighters. And again, to quote a colleague of mine, John Morgan, who's been in this business, forever. It seems like, right?
Yeah,
he's one of the OGs, but he always says, he has this golden rule, and it's so just spot on. And if you could follow it, you should. Believe me. Don't say anything to the fighter about the fighters that you wouldn't say to their face.
Mhm.
And even though I don't come to face, especially these days, you know, I'm not in the gym right now or anything like that, or at least Extreme Couture, right? I just kind of leave that for the fighters right now. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I get on the mats and I've been beat up a bunch. That's my main qualification. If anything, it's not any of the ranks that I've earned or haven't earned. It's not any of the things that I've competed in or fought in. It's that I've gotten beat up a lot. It's probably my main qualification. And I know that I can run into these fighters again on the mat. And, you know, I do video. I don't just do, you know, from some podcast. Like I'm on a video, I'm on a decent platform. Like all my stuff's out there. That's why, you know, like people can come at me for like a wrong pick. Like, haha, you got that pick wrong. Like you really think I could care less? Like, you know how many picks I get wrong having to pick all these fights? Like that's not new to me, you know? I could care less about that. It's more the fighters' reactions that I worry about because I want to have fun. I want to be honest with my audience. I want to entertain, but like, you know, I don't want to offend them. So I feel like I do a pretty good job at punching up. I feel like I do a pretty good job, at least in my more interpersonal podcast audience, like on the Protect Your Neck podcast. Like they know they're going to be in store for some in-depth analysis, but also some in-depth weirdness. You know what I'm saying? So I try to balance that brand out, but it's really tough. I'm glad you brought that up, and I do think respect needs to be maintained, both from fans and media. Like these are human beings at the end of the day, so cut them some slack.
Yeah, and you know, like before I was thinking like, man, I should just say whatever I want and kind of go crazy with the analysis. But then I think about it and step back and say, well, man, I'm not in a position, like you said, I'm not in a position to do that. You know what I mean? And I'm pretty, and there's guys out there and girls out there that have built a name off doing that, and you know that's their angle. That's what they want to do, and you know if they're blowing up off that, good for them. But that's not what I want to do. I want to kind of, you know, like I've had a situation where I'm analyzing what I saw, you know, because like I told you, everything is gut feeling for me. What I see, I just say what I see and what I feel. So when I give a compliment to a certain fighter about a fight, the other fighter will think the opposite of that, right? Like, oh, maybe was I not doing this? You know what I mean? Like that I've gotten into that before. You know, it's just like, okay, then I gotta just, even though that the other fighter or whoever will go at me about that, I'll just say, okay, I don't want to like I let me just try to keep everything positive, right? With what I say. And if I go at something, it'll be always against the organizations, against the commissions, against the judges, whatever, right? But for the fighters, you know, because they're the ones who step in there and do something that a large percentage, most of the population of the world would never do, and they would, if they did, they would just go inside and crawl up in a ball and cry. And you got to respect that, man. Those guys are in there, you know, throwing, you know, caution to the wind and giving us entertainment. So I gotta kind of try to keep everything positive and see it in a positive way and look at it like that, instead of just like, oh, you know, like, you know, people like to say like, you know, that dude just, he doesn't even deserve to be in the octagon. He doesn't even deserve to be in the UFC. And that's something I stopped saying, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to say that. And it's also like the retirement stuff too. Like, I don't say if Anderson Silva to retire, man. I think like you don't have the right to tell somebody to retire, man. You don't go to the post office and tell the guy working at the counter, like, you're too old, you should retire, right? It's like the dude knows when to retire. It's his decision. You know what I mean? Like you're not really in a position to tell somebody to retire, and you're not in a position to tell somebody that they don't, you know, deserve to be in the octagon, man. They're doing something that you're not doing, right? You got to kind of look at the positive, you know, aspects of what the fighters are doing.
Yeah, and if you are criticizing it, you know, tie it to what's relevant to what you're talking about, tie it to facts, certain things like that. And again, it's a super tough balance, but I completely agree with you. And I think, you know, people just need to remind themselves of that, you know, a little more, and including myself. But at the same time, it's just one of those things where it's like sometimes you get an audience because you're honest, but you don't want to make it a gimmick. You want to be honest because you're being honest, not because that's your shtick, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's this weird balance. And me personally, I already know, like, man, like I as you're talking, like not even just fighters, but in general, like probably jobs I've hurt myself on, promotions I've pissed off, Which I'm not a journalist and don't claim to be. That's kind of your job, I guess, right? So you're not supposed to be making these people happy, but like just even professional people or like random people, like I'm like non MMA stuff, like generals and stuff I've interviewed for like non MMA media stuff, right? I've definitely in my own weird brand and I've accepted that, but for better or worse, man, that's the one dangerous thing about being honest, is that you're probably not going to make a lot of friends either. So not that that's the job, but it's a tricky tightrope wire to walk in this business for sure.
Yeah, it is. It is a tightrope. It's a juggle or whatever you want to call it, right? Any circus act that you want to talk, name out. That's what we're doing right now. Now, before we get into the last question that I always ask every guest, let's get into some of the questions. Let's fire those off and then get out of here.
All right, Stephen Teklitz is asking, who does Sugar Sean O'Malley fight next? Since his hype train and fan base seem to have shriveled, and can we please find Ryan Hall a fight?
All right. Well, let's dig into Sean O'Malley first, Dan. Give us your analysis of his last fight and now, has this hype train shriveled? I don't think so. I think his hype train is still going. He has a huge fan base. If you go to his YouTube, it's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know the correct word for it, but it's like the fire when it looks like it's going to go out, but there's still plenty of fire there. You just gotta take a stick and get some oxygen in there, and the fire comes back up. Like that's where he's at. Like, I think it'd be premature to put the nail in his coffin. But here's what I will say about that and about matchmaking, because it ties into an interesting intangible that now I don't hear a lot of people talk about, and it's one of my canaries in the coal mine, which is at 135, the weight class O'Malley competes in particular. We see a lot of overgrown guys. It's like lightweight back in the day, where the average size of the fighter grew with the weight cutting, right? So we have all these giant, tall guys. But whether it's guys that are other prospects like Montel Jackson or Andre Uhl, who tends, even though he actually had a better showing his last time out, he has a bad habit still of gassing in the third round or getting hurt. A lot of these guys, they're either gassing and or getting hurt. And I think it's because of possibly cutting too much weight and long frames. We've seen it like Corey, speaking of 155, Corey Anderson, the first guy to snap his shin like Anderson Silva, right? A lot of these skinnier frame guys, you see a lot of the injuries when they are fighting at their lower end of the spectrum, right? And Sean O'Malley, I've kind of had that theory on. He's had a lot of injury issues, not just the ankle injury that helped lead to his TKO over loss to Chito Vera. So my canary in the coal mine is I actually would like to see Sean O'Malley go up to 45. I don't think he's going to do it in his next fight, but I do think it is an inevitability that needs to happen.
I didn't even look at it like that, but you are right. He has had some interesting injuries in the past, and especially during the fight, which you don't really see many guys kind of show their injury in a fight, but he has in his last couple fights where he were injured. So yeah, but when you look at the matchups, I think like O'Malley, he shouldn't fight anybody above him. I feel like he should fight somebody like a Nathaniel Wood, or maybe like you mentioned, Montel Jackson, John Dodson. I think those are some of the names that he should be calling out. You know what I mean? Thomas Almeida, that's not a bad matchup either. He came out and said that he turned down the fight against Sean O'Malley. I don't know if that's true or not, but because Thomas Almeida doesn't seem like a guy that's would turn down fights. He's a Brazilian from shoot to box. Like,
yeah, true.
That's not a characteristic those guys have, right? So I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. But now and moving forward, the Ryan Hall question. Like I interviewed Ryan Hall, and man, he's frustrated as all hell because he wants to fight somebody above him, but it's just not working out for him, man. Who do you think would be the best matchup for Ryan Hall?
Someone brought it up, and I'm drawing blank on the name. I'm guessing it was a featherweight or a lightweight because those are the divisions that Hall competes in. But it was a grappling specialist, a submission specialist who just looked to earn his keep immediately. Got people talking very recently within the last couple months, and Ryan Hall was a popular name pitched. I can't. Is it ringing any bells for you guys? Because now I'm
Herbert Burns or Bryce Mitchell.
Bryce Mitchell, there we go. That's it. Bryce Mitchell. Give me some Bryce Mitchell versus Ryan Hall, baby. That's what I want.
Yeah, and that's what everybody wants. The fans want to see Ryan Hall face a guy that's well versed on the ground, right? To see like how good is his ground really. But Ryan Hall doesn't want to do that. He's like, I don't want these novelty matchups. I want the best guys in the world. That's why he called out the Korean Zombie, because he wants to fight the Korean Zombie. And the Korean Zombie's in a peculiar spot too right now because he calls out Zabit, and Zabit already responds and says that he doesn't want to fight the Korean Zombie. He's coming off a loss, and Zabit wants to fight in a 5-round fight. So that, they're in this weird position. And the Zombie, he doesn't want to fight a 5-round fight in his next fight because he's main evented for like 7 straight shows or 8 shows, which means he's done many 5-round fights, and he's not getting paid how much he should be getting paid right now. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the Korean Zombie is being, undercut and really paid low for what he's done for the promotion. But anyways, that's another topic. Going back to Ryan Hall. Yeah, I want to see Bryce Smith, Joe. I want to see Herbert Burns. I want to see some of those guys face off against him. But it doesn't seem like he's going to get a top ranked guy. So you might as well just throw him in there with, like you said, a Bryce Mitchell. I think that makes sense. What's next? We got something else?
Tristan asked a while ago. Sorry, we didn't get to it. Okay. Just your predictions for Holland versus Jacare.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Who you got for this one, John?
Man, I'm going to ride the momentum and go with Holland in this fight. I feel like if Holland can stay off the ground, but the thing is, his fight against Brendan Allen, right? Wasn't he tapped out by Brendan Allen, rear naked choke? So, and I feel like Jacare is way, Jacare, man. It's just like, he's up there at the echelons, right, of like the Damian Mayas and stuff of, MMA or grapplers in MMA. But I don't know, Jacare, he just is age catching up to him? Is all those wars catching up to him? I don't know. I mean, if Holland can keep his distance and just kind of catch him, like how he caught what's his name? What was his last knockout versus the guy that got the knockout of the year? Joaquin Buckley. Yeah, the Joaquin Buckley. When he knocked out Joaquin, can he keep the distance and kind of, piece him up from? I think if Holland can do that and not try to go to the ground with Jacare, I feel like Holland would get this fight. I feel like he could finish him, right? But then you've seen Jacare lose a fight and then come back and knock out Chris Weidman at the same time. So this is it's a toss-up, man. But I'm gonna give the edge to Holland though.
I officially submitted Jacare as my pick with the room to reserve it. But yeah, he's who I'm leaning toward right now. But it's a real interesting one. Small cage, hard not to favor the grapplers though. If it's a close fight, that's one way to look at it in these Apex fights.
Yeah, that's why we got to ask you, man, because I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about the small cage. That's stuff that I'm not an analyst. That's why I'm not an analyst, because I don't think about those things. I just think about like, oh, what highlight did I see last on Twitter, and then what happened with this guy, and Jacare is fighting for the first time since contracting COVID, right? Am I right? Yeah, right. Like when he was
both of them, really.
Oh, that's what I think. Holland came out and said that he never tested positive.
No, he said never.
False positive, right? But it's hard to believe,
he
man.
Tested, it's hard because he tested negative after, so I'm sure he would like to assume he was asymptomatic either way. So
yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of fighters testing positive that we don't know because they're not lined up to fight, or it's just too far out, so they don't have to say anything to anybody about it. But man, I just been hearing a lot of stuff. Dan,
Yeah, I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah, totally.
Like fans don't know, man, but a lot of these fighters, they've been testing positive and they just haven't been telling people, and they've recovered and they have the the antibodies or whatever. So it seems like they're good to go. So it almost seems like catching it while you're not set up to fight is a good thing. So you could recover, have the antibodies, and be able to fight.
Yeah, it depends, man. I mean, I'm hearing more and more people catching it, and even younger people with the after symptoms, I know we all know the more popular cases, but I'm talking about like even just like random young, healthy jiu-jitsu people I know that are like are having the breathing stuff even after they've cleared it. So that's the part that scares me for these athletes, because if that happens to me or you, it sucks, but we're not having to put our cardiovascular level. It's not going to depend our pay on how much we get paid, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions we got here?
I think we had one about Tony Ferguson a while ago. Do you think?
The weight cut was going to affect him. Yeah. I think that's interesting because not so much that affected him last time because he says that it didn't. Take that for what you will. But I would argue that I wonder if this more steady pace will be good for Ferguson. Some people suspect after the last surgery, we saw an inkling of a drop off in the beginning of the Cowboy Cerrone fight, even though he won it. And then, of course, he has the not great performance against Justin Gaethje. But, again, he was making record turnarounds in somewhat short notice camps for even the Cowboy fight back at UFC 238. And then, of course, somewhat a short notice crazy camp in one of the first be one of the first people tasked to do a camp in, the beginning of the pandemic era, if you will. And so it's like, did we really even get a good look at Tony? 7 months time is kind of that perfect. It's above the 6 months. So I don't like seeing people take serious brain trauma and come back before 6 months. So he's past that. But 7 months isn't quite so far out to where maybe we get he's more in his groove because he's been far from consistent. These last few years have been the hardest, most inconsistent years of his career. So I think that's more what we got to watch for.
This Ferguson versus Oliveira fight is the most interesting fight of this weekend. And man, I would love to see Oliveira just go out there and pull guard and to see what happens. That's what I want to see. I don't even want to see them strike. I want to see like who can tap who. Even if it was jiu-jitsu only, I would have watched that. You know what I mean? Like it's just so intriguing to see, like, because you look at Oliveira, he holds the record for most finishes, and I think he holds the record for most performance bonuses too. And how do you not be a fan of that guy? It seems like it's pretty incredible that how he holds those records, but still people don't know who he is. Like he's on like a 10 fight win streak. Man, it's Tony Ferguson. This is a crossroads fight for Tony Ferguson more than it is for Oliveira, right?
Feels that way, that's for sure. But Oliveira definitely deserves his due. You're right.
Yeah, he does, man. Respect to Oliveira. Now, before we get out of here, I mean, Hall of Fame, MMA Hall of Fame, who do you put in there? We've had many guests in the past put in their guys or girls. Who do you feel like should deserve the MMA Hall of Fame? Not UFC. Everybody thinks I'm doing UFC Hall of Fame. No, it's MMA.
I'm gonna go contrarian here, and we're gonna keep it to fighters. We're not gonna get all crazy like the new modern day wing. We're gonna induct this fight, and then it gets all crazy. It does seem like a pretty open format. I see a lot of the names that should be on there have already been submitted, so I'm gonna go contrarian. I'm gonna stay in the lightweight division, and I'm gonna go for Jim Miller, and I'm gonna tell you why though, because not only does Jim Miller hold his own records as far as most UFC wins and appearances, especially because Bisping's out of the race now, and it's pretty much between him and Cerrone. Like they take turns every time Jim fights, he beats Cerrone, and then Cerrone fights. Depending if Cerrone fights at lightweight or they win, they're always neck and neck. But I feel like he's a guy like a Cerrone who he never got to a championship, but it's not always about championships. It's about great fighters, great fights, great divisions. And he's a great fighter in great fights in a great division. And regardless of if Jim never got to a championship, he represents those fighters where, like we talked about, you don't have to just be some Hall of Famer or you're nothing or you suck. Like, in fact, you can actually make a really worthwhile career, be a great fighter, have a lot of worthwhile fans, make a lot of good money. He's up there in one of the most bonuses earned, one of the first guys to submit Charles Oliveira, by the way, which was Jim Miller. But more importantly, when the UFC was having its golden era, that, the UFC, Dana, the Fertittas really built off the backs of fighters like this, like Joe Lozon, like those guys, these guys who were on the undercards. We're complaining about bad cards now, people. It's because we're comparing it to the cards of the Jim Miller days where it wasn't just Brock Lesnar at the top of the card. You were getting Jim Miller and Joe Lozon right below it, baby. I mean, you were getting all these fights, and these guys the UFC built upon the backs of. They're lucky to have some money to show for it, but they should have a whole heck of a lot more, and they will never get the fanfare. And I will put him on there so that he stands out like a sore thumb on your list so that people are reminded, John, you should appreciate those, not just those undefeated records or the titles. Like, as we're seeing in MMA, undefeated records don't last. And what the heck do titles really mean anymore? Okay. What do rankings really mean? It's about the fighters. Jim Miller's a fighter's fighter.
Completely agree, man. And eventually one of our guests will probably put up Joe Lawson. He's up there as one of those guys too. even Diego Sanchez. You know what I mean? Like guys that put on incredible fights. Even guys like a Clay Guida. You know what I mean? Like those are the guys, man, that we should respect and always kind of shout out from time to time to show that we appreciate what you've done and all the blood spilt and and everything that you've accomplished in that octagon or the cage or the ring or whatever. But yes, Dan, appreciate the time, man. Hour and a half, it went by so fast. And I love the perspective that you give, because you give this perspective that I don't even think about. It doesn't even come across my mind. But when you say it, now I become more conscious of it and certain aspects of looking at fights. And it's great to have you on. You know what I mean? I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. I've been following you for a long time. Make sure you guys go subscribe to Dan's YouTube page, where you can see all his podcasts. Daniel Tom. We'll put the link on the bottom. Go check him out on MMA Junkie, USA Today, Line Movement. Shout out to the guys at Line Movement. Great guys out there. And you do have a podcast with them, right? What is the podcast called?
I do the MMA betting show. We record that on Wednesday. They come out Thursdays. And then on the same podcast feed, you can find James Lynch's Octagon Outlook every Monday.
Definitely, man. Yeah, anywhere, especially just go follow Dan on his Twitter at Dan Tom, right? His name is so original that you don't even have to battle for the tag, right? Anyways, Nick, appreciate you, man. He's the producer extraordinaire. And next week we have Mike from Odds Breakers. He's a guy we're gonna delve into the gambling way more next week. And I got so many questions because I have no idea about gambling, right? So so stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe, like, share, whatever you need to do. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And until next time, stay safe and stay away from sorry.